Greetings and welcome to Conversations with Consequences. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association, where we aim to change the culture one conversation at a time. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern, or catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on Sirius XM channel 130. Of course, our radio show is also a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org or directly to wherever you listen to your podcast.
I'm your host, Mary Fiorito.
And I'm Betsy Fentress.
And we are so thrilled to have with us today Sister Kristen Gardner. She is the postulator for the beatification cause and the canonization cause of Sister Clare Crockett. You've probably heard at some point of the hit show Dairy Girls. Well, Sister Clare Crockett was a real-life Dairy Girl who became a sister of the Home of the Mother, one of a religious order, and now her cause for canonization is open and proceeding. And Sister Kristen, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
And so, Sister, just to start, if you could tell us a little bit about your congregation, because I know you have a presence here in the United States, but I think many Catholics probably wouldn't be as familiar with it as, say, the Dominicans or the Franciscans or what have you.
Well, I'm a servant sister of the Home of the Mother. We were founded in 1984 by a Spanish diocesan priest named Father Rafael Alonso. And we have three missions in the church, which are the first is the defense of the Eucharist. The second is the defense of the honor of Our Lady, especially in the privilege of her virginity. And the third is the conquest for young people for Christ. The Home of the Mother received the pontifical approval in 2010, and we're happy to be members of the church, serving the church for the glory of God.
So, Sister, where does the phrase the Home of the Mother come from, that title? Is it referring to Mary's home in Loretto?
It's referring to Our Lady's home. Well, it's first in Nazareth. Obviously, part of that home is now in Loretto as well. But it means that we want to live in Our Lady's home and be part of her family. So wherever we are, we feel like that's her home. It's really, her home is her heart. No, we live in her home. She's the mother of us as a family. We have the sisters, the brothers, families, young people. So we're just a big family, and she's our mother, and she takes care of us and guides us and leads us to lead everyone to her son.
And Sister, when did you become a part of the community?
I entered in the year of 2002.
Okay. And so it sounds like it's a very Marian spirituality, which is
Yes.
which is very beautiful. So, well, let's begin with Sister Clare Crockett. She, of course, was a very successful actress and TV presenter on, I believe, the RTE and the BBC. Tell us about Sister Clare, how she came to meet you all, and how her cause is going so far.
So Sister Clare Crockett, she was a young girl from Northern Ireland. Her dream was to become a famous actress in Hollywood. And when she was 17, she had already been a presenter for several programs in Channel 4. She had been offered a job in Nickelodeon as well. And she was invited to go on a free trip to Spain. And she imagined parties and beaches. I mean, she was a normal teenager, as you can imagine,
Right.
Without practicing their faith. You can imagine what her life was like, And so she was invited to go to Spain, and she was like, yeah, for sure. But then she discovered that it was really a pilgrimage and a retreat. So she tried to back out, but it was too late. The name was on the ticket, and she's like, well, I can't say no. And she was always a person, she was up for anything, so it'll be an adventure, even if it's
Right.
a religious adventure. So she signed up, and she arrived here in Spain. I was also there when she arrived. I was here with my family. I was 14 at the time. She was 17, so she was 3 years older than me, which at that age, you can tell the difference more
Right.
than later on. But I do remember her at that retreat. We ended up at a monastery in Cuenca, Spain, which is about 2 hours away from Madrid. And she was always outside smoking, trying to get some sun. She didn't take part much in the activities of the retreat. It was during Holy Week of the year 2000. But on Good Friday, she was told, you really should go into the church on Good Friday. Like, you can't just stand outside. Good Friday, we're remembering the day our Lord died for us. You should really go in. And so she entered in, and in the moment when everyone venerates the cross, she got up and she got in the line like everyone else, and she kissed the cross. And there, our Lord gave her the grace to understand how much he loved her, and how all of her sins and her lack of love for him were offending him, and how that he was on the cross for her to save her. And that changed her life. She had a very radical personality. So her immediate reaction was like, okay, he's on the cross for love of me. I have to give my life to him. I have to give my life to him. And so she saw the sisters at the retreat. She's like, well, I'll have to be one of them. So that's how it all started. It wasn't immediate. It's not like the next day she entered and became a sister. It took her a year of, going back and forth. Like, is this really what God wants? Is it what I want?
And her parents were opposed to it, from what I understand.
Yes, I think you also have to put yourself in her parents' feet as well. I mean, your daughter wants to be a famous actress. She loves partying, and all of a sudden she comes back from a retreat in Spain and says she's going to be a nun. They're like, what?
Mm.
It was such a huge change that they couldn't understand it. They didn't have a strong faith as well. So I think you really have to have faith to understand how God can
Right.
give such a sudden grace to a person that changes the desires of their heart.
Yeah.
And so they didn't understand, what was going on. They thought first she was joking around and that she had really met some guy in Spain and that she was going to live with him and just saying she was going to be a nun. She was always joking. So it was hard for them to know if it was real or not. So I think until they were able to come to Spain themselves, meet the sisters, and they're like, oh, wow, this is real. So it took them time to process it. But yes, it was difficult for her. Her parents didn't want her to go to Spain, and she said no, but I have to follow God, and I have to follow His will. And she was 18, and she as soon as she finished high school,
Mhm.
secondary school, as they say there in Ireland, she flew over to Spain and to become a sister.
So the documentary is called All or Nothing. Were you involved in the making of that documentary, sister?
Yes, I guess you could call me the producer of the documentary.
Oh, great.
And I was the one who, the idea behind it. So the idea was really Father Rafael Alonso, our founder. He saw how many people became interested in Sister Clare after her death, because she died in 2016 in an earthquake in Ecuador, and after that it was just an avalanche of emails, phone calls, letters, even asking for more information about Sister Clare, wanting to getting to know her more. So we decided to do this documentary. We also discovered that we had lots of footage, and it's a blessing, because in the year 2000 there was a Catholic television station in Italy that closed down, and they offered us all the cameras and machines, and our founder, Father Raphael, he's like, well, God wants us to evangelize through the media. So he accepted all that, and we started learning how to use cameras. And this was back in the year 2000, so there's these big, huge cameras that weren't very easy to use. So you always had a sister. I remember when I arrived, there was always some sister practicing with the camera. Where do you practice? Well, with the other sisters, And so, so we have lots of tapes of just random footage, around the house or doing things. Because people, when they see the documentary, like, how do you have so much video of Sister Clare? It's like, well, we don't just have video of Sister Clare; we have video of all the sisters.
I had the same question. I thought, how in the world did they kind of presciently know that they were going to want to do a movie about this extraordinary woman?
No, we didn't. It just, we have lots of footage of lots of different things. I mean, hundreds of tapes. So that summer after the earthquake, I went through it all and seeing how much material we had. And sometimes in one tape I found like 10 seconds of Sister Clare, and the other hour was somebody else, other things. But when you added it all together, it was a lot of material. So we saw it as a sign from God, and we started. We did it all ourselves. I asked the sisters in the U.S. I was like, "Oh, can you record interviews there in Jacksonville with all the teachers and students that knew Sister Clare?" In Ecuador, the same thing. Like, all the sisters in the different communities, did their part to contribute to the documentary, and then they sent it all to me, and I put it together, basically.
Well, I think one of the things that Americans at least find so interesting about her is that she had sort of hit the pinnacle of what a lot of young girls dream for. She had an actual television offer, loads of money coming along with that. I remember at some point in the documentary, she talks about being in a very, very high-end hotel, and they'd gone to dinner, and she came back to her room and cried because she felt so empty. None of it filled her up. But she was also, of course, very beautiful, very striking young woman. And I think that's just so odd to Americans these days, because we have fewer women entering religious life, and certainly very few TV stars entering religious life. I think there was a the one woman who was in the movie with Elvis Presley, whose name is escaping me now. Betsy, do you remember?
Oh, she's the nun up in like
Yes,
Connecticut now.
she became a
Dolores
Benedictine.
Hart.
Dolores Hart, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think since Dolores Hart we've had anything like this. So she's, it's kind of interesting. But the children who I guess are young adults now that she taught in Florida, they seem to just have been besotted with her. Like she was their
Yes.
favorite teacher. Can you tell us a little bit about their experience, just as when she entered and she was teaching in this school? How did that continue to shape her vocation?
I think she had such a gift, the gift that she had for acting and the gift she had for people. She was a very good people person. She immediately connected with all different types of people. It wasn't just that, with children, no, but she was also great with elderly people. I mean, she had a gift for everyone.
Everybody loved her.
Everybody loved her. And I think it's those gifts that God had given her. Well, now instead of putting them at her own service to become famous and be a star, she put them at the service of God. So when she was teaching little kids, I mean, you could have preschoolers, just totally, looking at her with their mouths open, not getting distracted at any little thing, just because she had such a gift to catch their attention. She'd tell them a story, and they loved it. So she put those gifts at the service of God, and used it to bring the kids to her, to the kids to God. And I think it's also amazing how you ask these kids who are now, well, now that one of them just got married recently and has her baby girl that she named Claire after Sister Clare.
Oh.
But you ask them and they still remember concrete things that Sister Clare would tell them. Like one remembers how she explained the scapular to them. Another remembers how she explained the difference between venial mortal sin and the importance to go to confession. I mean, they remember very concrete things. That's amazing that a 6-year-old can remember 15 years later these such specific things. But I think it's that she had such a gift and God used her and the kids remembered it. It really stayed in their hearts and their memories.
Joy really just emanates from the screen. I just found myself looking in front of the screen, smiling most of the time until I cried when she died. But I want to go back a little bit to what Mary said about her family, because I found the interviews with the family so genuine and interesting in that there was ambivalence, like you said, because she was on her way to becoming the thing she always wanted to do. But her family was moved. Her two sisters say that they are now mass goers. And is there any kind of movement in Ireland that we see in vocations because of her life and her example?
I don't have specific numbers of how many vocations in Ireland. I do think that she has a special mission with Ireland. We have a community of sisters now about 45 minutes away from her grave in Derry, because her family asked for her to be buried in Derry, and we accepted that petition because it really seemed, I don't know, we felt like she had a special mission to evangelize Ireland after her death. So she's now there buried. And the sisters who live close say it's amazing. Whenever they go to the tomb, there's always someone at the tomb, always, if not several people. And I think she brings a lot of hope, especially to the young people in Derry. It's a city that suffered a lot through the time of troubles. Sister Clare's parents would have been the ones who'd suffered most, but even in her very young years, she would have lived some of the violence between, the Protestants and the Catholics there. And so to see how someone was able to come out of all of that and have such joy and have such fulfillment in their life, and that God's the one who gives that, because I think there's a high rate of suicides among young people there, lots of alcohol, lots of drugs, and to see how someone is able to come out of all that and find true happiness, it's a sign of hope. Like, it is possible. God can really give you true happiness, but He's the only one who can do it. And I think that's the message she has for the people there. Over 100 people from Derry came for the opening of the cause here in Spain. The streets were full of Irish people all over the place. They're planning a pilgrimage for next year. And I think it's beautiful, the mission she has in Ireland. But I think specific numbers, I don't have specific numbers about how many vocations or how many, but she is doing her work there, yes.
Well, definitely there's what, the church calls the vox populi, the voice of the people. We saw this after St. John Paul II's death, people
Mhm.
crying, Santo Subito, make him a saint now. And, that's one of the things that the church examines is, was there after the death a real surge of prayer for this person's intercession, of, indications that she might already be interceding. She was like, because I think it's actually you who say in the documentary, she was very ready to die. And, would have been in a complete, she had just gone to mass in a complete state of grace, when the Lord, took her and the five companions very quickly. And, one of the things that's interesting about Derry, that's Derry is known for, are its murals. And so large murals of important people and cultural figures and things like that. And there's a beautiful large mural of Sister Clare now. Two? Are there two now? There's one right near her burial site. And then
Right.
where's the other one, Sister?
The other one's in the north part of the city, but
Okay.
the second one she's in a white habit, and the other one she's in the blue habit. 'Cause we
Oh,
have two
got it.
habits.
Okay. I've seen the blue. I haven't seen the white habit one. I've seen the blue one. I'll have to go look. But, it's just, even if you're watching the show Dairy Girls, and then PBS had a terrific documentary last year called Once Upon a Time in Northern Ireland, when you look back on everything that happened. And it's just surreal to look back on, my grandmother was from the north, from Antrim. And I remember going to Belfast for the first time, and it was nothing to see a British soldier with a machine gun standing on the street corner, like by the grocery store. That was just very, very typical. And the violence in the name of religion. As you said, her parents would have been in the generation that was impacted the most directly, but the children were not immune to it, which is what I think the Dairy Girls series showed, what people had to live with on a daily basis. And I remember her, Sister Clare, saying, my parents were Catholic, but not for religious reasons, but for political reasons.
I noticed that too.
Yeah. And so it was, but then, the Lord just transforming all of them. And now her sister's going back to mass. And I understand her father passed away recently.
See, both of her parents have passed away after the
Oh,
earthquake, but they both
okay.
died with the sacraments, and so it's a blessing.
So why was her cause opened in Spain then? Is that because that's where your community is located?
Yeah, our headquarters is in Alcalá de Henares, Spain, the headquarters of the Servant Sisters. So it really made we were discerning and praying about it, and it was very difficult for the bishop in Ecuador because to start the cause, because he doesn't have priests who are prepared with canon law, to do that and
Right.
to
It's a
use
very
the time.
specific process. Yes.
Yeah. So that we talked to the bishop here, and since it's our headquarters, and it's true that most there are a lot of witnesses in Ecuador, but there's also witnesses in the U.S. There's witnesses in Ireland. There's witnesses who live now in Spain. I mean, since she was in those four countries.
Right.
It really is indifferent which country you do the cause in. So we asked the
tell us
Holy
about
See
her-
for permission. And
Yeah, pardon me. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Sister.
No.
I was going to ask, though, because I know that she died along with five other girls. Is that correct? And so
Yes.
and I know I've seen some references to Sister Clare and her companions. Will all their causes be introduced together, or is this specifically for Sister Clare?
This is just specifically for Sister Clare. Because since, I mean, if they had been martyrs, you could introduce them all together.
Right.
But they're not martyrs. They died in an earthquake.
Right.
They died together, but each one would have to be studied individually. At the moment, we're praying and asking for light from God, also to see, what He wants. Perhaps in the future, we might consider opening the cause for Valeria, who's a young girl, 15, who died with Sister Clare. Her stories, she has an amazing story of forgiveness, which is a heroic virtue. I mean, she was present when her father killed her mother when she was 3 years old.
Wow.
And so it's a story of great sadness, but at the same time a great testimony of forgiveness, of how when she came to the school that the sisters directed there, close to her home, when she was 11, she learned that it was possible to forgive, and that God loved her father, and that God desired the salvation of her father, and so she opened her heart, and it's like, I also want him to be in heaven with me, and to learn how to forgive him, and she irradiates. You see the pictures of her in her last years, and she radiates a joy when you compare it to the pictures of when she was younger, the sadness she had in her eyes. It's a beautiful story. Yeah, it's a beautiful story. So.
Can you tell us about any intercessory prayers that they are attributing to Sister Clare. I think there's one on infertility. We'd love to hear about those.
Oh, there's many cases of people who aren't able to have babies, and they ask for Sister Clare's intercession. There's lots of babies. I have pictures that constantly arrive of babies named Claire after Sister Clare, thanks to her intercession. I think some of the biggest miracles recently, we have someone with I can't remember the name, but some type of illness in the eye, a disease in the eye, an eye disease that was degenerative, and the person had already lost a great deal of eyesight. And they asked Sister Clare's intercession. They've totally recovered the eyesight, which the doctors have said they don't know how this is, but that illness, that disease never
was it
goes backwards.
retinitis pigmentosa? Is that it?
No, that doesn't sound like it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I should have looked it up.
I know somebody who had a very random a priest from the north of Ireland who has that particular eye disease. Because I was going to say I'll get Sister Clare on it right away for him.
So that was a recent one. There's also a woman who a 3-year-old child. The other day, a few weeks ago in Barcelona, he fell from a height of 3 meters, so that'd be about 3 yards, 4 yards. I don't know and he broke his head open. The skull was fractured, blood coming out of the ears. Anyways, they took him to the hospital, and the parents began to pray to Sister Clare. They had been at the opening ceremony for the cause of beatification, and 3 days later, the little boy was running around a plane as if nothing had ever happened. The fracture had disappeared. So we're still waiting for that. Say all these things that there's tested. We're still waiting for the medical reports, so you can see. I mean, if a fracture disappears from one day to another on the X-rays, well, that's pretty clear.
But the doctors have to be interviewed.
Haven't seen.
Yeah,
right,
the doctors
you have to interview the doctors.
Right, to get their sworn testimony for that sort of thing too. And Sister Kristen, let's go back to the day that Sister Clare and the 5 girls were killed in the Ecuadorian earthquake. Can you take us back to that moment? What happened? What happened after her remains were found? I know that's a difficult part of the day, but it seems like she died even in the same heroic way that she lived.
So a week before the earthquake, there was a flood in Playa Prieta, and so the school was flooded. It was the water was about waist high, so the whole first floor of the building was totally full of water, and the mud that came with it. Kind of similar to what happened in Valencia recently, here in Spain a few months ago. So that whole week, as the water started subsiding, they were cleaning, getting rid of the mud. And I think this flood also caused the foundations of the building to be weakened a bit, because it was wet for a whole week. And so it was a week of heroic virtue for all of them. They were constantly, singing, laughing as they worked nonstop, to try the school year was going to begin a week after this flood occurred. So it was like, oh my gosh, we have to, they had just painted the classrooms now, like it's all full of mud. Like, let's, try to see what we can save, clean it. So they spent that week cleaning. And then when they were almost finished, it was Saturday morning, they did the last few things. And in the afternoon, they went to mass. It was one of the first days they had been able to go to mass after the flood, because they weren't able to leave the building, and there's no priest living close by. They were able to receive communion, but they weren't able to go to mass. So Saturday was one of the first days they were able to go to mass, and then went to mass at 5 p.m. They came home, and Sister Clare went with a group of girls to practice the guitar. She was teaching them how to play the guitar, and it was a way also to get kind of distracted. They've been living this flood, this difficult situation, so to get together and sing and play the guitar was a way to elevate their spirits. And at 7, they were going to pray the rosary together. So the earthquake occurred at 6:58. So it was 2 minutes right before they were going to start praying the rosary. At first they have 2 words in Spanish for the quakes. One is a temblor, which would be like a temblor, like a small little shake. And then there's an earthquake, which is something that's above a 6.0, I believe. So at first they thought it was just something small, but then it kept going and kept going.
So that's why they didn't leave the building when they found.
So that's why they started to run towards the stairs, which really, when an earthquake occurs, the stairs are the worst place you can go. But obviously you don't know how much time you have. It could be worse to stay inside. So all the ones who died were on the staircase. The sisters who were further up and who didn't make it to the staircase are the ones who survived, the sisters and girls. Also because they one of the sisters went running to the tabernacle to save Jesus. Another sister was further inside, didn't make it all the way to the stairs, different reasons. So once the building collapsed, there was two lay members of the Home of the Mother, two men from the town who had, after Mass, they had stayed chatting outside the church. And the church is right across the street from the school building and the sister's house. So they were out there talking, and the earthquake started, and they turned and they saw how the building just collapsed. It was a 4-story building, and it just collapsed. And so they immediately went to try to see if there was somebody alive. They started shouting, and the sisters who were alive inside started responding. And so they tried to find a way to get them. They asked them to start knocking on the cement. And one of the sisters just had a palm's distance from her face, the huge block of cement. So they started, searching for them. But Sister Clare and the girls who passed away with her were on the second floor of the building, so they're further down. So it took them a lot longer to, the first sisters who were rescued told them where they were, where the other girls were, where the other sisters were. But since they were so far down, there was more plaques of cement on top of them. It took them around a day until they were able to find their bodies. So that was very painful, obviously, for the community, for Sister Clare's family, because one thing is they tell you, oh, she's dead. And another thing is, well, we don't know, and they continued. But I think for me, at least, that whole day of prayer and waiting for the response to know if she was alive or dead was a day experience of, I remember feeling that our Lord said to me, but you can't be sad.
Yeah.
You believe in eternal life? And I was like, yes, I do. But, she's my sister.
Sister, that's a great place for us to stop and just reflect on the life of Sister Clare Crockett. Thank you so much for being here. People should look at your book, Sister Clare Crockett, Alone with Christ Alone, or go to sisterclare.com. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Sister, thanks so much.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Ashley McGuire.
And I'm Mary Fiorito.
And this month has been called Down Syndrome Awareness Month, but it's really much more than that. March is about educating and bringing awareness to all the different trisomies. Each of the 23 chromosomes can have a triplicate, so the third month represents the third copy of a chromosome, and the day of the month represents the number of a chromosome that is affected. Trisomy 9, for example, is highlighted on March 9th, and trisomy 13 on March 13th, and trisomy 21, which is what gives a child Down syndrome, on March 21st. And we are happy to have Beverly Jacobson with us of Mama Bear Care. She has been raising awareness about trisomy 13. Welcome to the show, Beverly.
Thank you. Our daughter actually has trisomy 18, but I'm so happy to speak out on behalf of all those who have a trisomy condition. As you were mentioning, March is the third month, and so Trisomy Awareness Month is where we're at, and it's just a delight and an honor to be able to share more about my daughter and then some of the community that we serve as well.
Well, thank you. And so many of the pro-life movement recently watched you either in person or on a live stream as you spoke at the March for Life this year. So please tell us about your 9th child, Verity, and what led you to start Mama Bear Care.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's just, she's such a blessing, but I will say, what a journey we've been on. We thought we'd have 2, maybe 3 kids. And so here we are, with a big family that the Lord blessed us with. So Verity, I was about halfway through my pregnancy with her when we got the news that she had a condition called trisomy 18, or Edwards syndrome, it's also known. And I had, of course, heard of Down syndrome, but I had never heard of this condition. And nobody I knew had gone through something like this, receiving dire news, from the doctor, and then being told that probably the baby would pass away in utero, or if she did survive to birth, it would be a very brief and very difficult life. So that really just sent us kind of spiraling. I mean, it's really hard to be told that about a child that you feel kicking inside of you. It just felt like such a paradox. I could definitely feel she was alive and just as active, if not more so, than my other babies. And yet to expect that our time with her would be so brief and so sad and tragic, it just really put a pall over the rest of the pregnancy. And I spent, weeks planning a burial and then actually got connected to some families who had children with the same condition, not just infants, but toddlers, children, teenagers, even some adults who had this condition. I had no idea from the initial, conversations and initial research that we did. We really didn't think that this was even possible. So then that shifted my whole perspective of what exactly is this going to look like if Verity lives. And we gave her the name Verity, which means truth, because we felt called to speak the truth about the value of all human life, regardless of chromosomes, regardless of genetic anomalies or what have you. She is made in God's image and she is valuable. And we wanted to fight for her life, whatever that would look like.
There's a comedian who's quite popular now, Shane Gillis, who has an uncle who has Down syndrome. And he speaks of his uncle in some of his comedy routines sometimes, where he talks about, if he mentions, my uncle has Down syndrome, and people say, "Oh, how is he doing?" And he said, "I always say he's doing better than everybody else is doing.
Right?
He's the happiest human being in the world. He loves everyone, and everyone loves him. Nothing to feel sorry for him."
Right.
And that it does make you think. It's that like the initial reaction of people, right? Like, oh, like it's a terrible thing. He said, "It's not a terrible thing. He's the happiest man alive. Are you kidding?" And he has
Right.
very funny stories about his uncle sneaking
Sure.
grilled cheese sandwiches into people's purses and things like that. He sounds like quite the character.
Yes.
But I wonder if you could share with us, as a mom who has had that experience of being given an adverse prenatal diagnosis, what would have helped you have in that moment that was absent from the delivering of that diagnosis?
Yeah, I think it's the framing, the way that we speak about it. As you just alluded to, usually the news is accompanied with, "I'm so sorry. This is what's happening." And for us, the doctor who delivered the news, confirmed through the diagnostic ultrasound, she did not talk about my baby. She talked about the fetus and it. And we had just found out Verity was a girl. And so for us, this is usually a very joyous time where we find out the sex of the baby and we can decide on a name because we like to pray for our babies. And so for us, it felt like her humanity was being robbed, and it was a very cold and clinical experience. And I've thought about that because, now we have Mama Bear Care, which I launched a few years ago because I wanted to provide something for parents that wasn't there for us. I felt that we were groping in the dark. And I was thinking about, the contrast between how the news is presented. Typically, it might be, "I'm so sorry. When do you want to schedule the termination?" versus, "Your child has this condition. It does have challenges, and there are some significant concerns, but here are some resources, and we're here to walk alongside you. We're here to help you figure out what those next steps are." Thankfully for us, abortion was not presented as the next logical step, but that's unusual, actually. Most moms who receive a diagnosis, that is the expectation. When do you want to schedule the termination? They might give them a few days to go home and, think about things, but usually appointment after appointment, that's just what is pushed on them. And I think that initial conversation, what a difference it would make, and I don't think it's necessarily bad to say, "I'm sorry," because this is, especially in a pregnancy period, but after the child is born, that that's so different. And yes, it's hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It has been difficult in many ways, but the families that we have served come back over and over and say they would do it all over again, even for the little ones who have passed, even if they only had some hours or days or months or a few short years. We don't know. We call it a life-limiting diagnosis around here. And by the way, I appreciate you said adverse prenatal diagnosis. A lot of people, especially in the medical community, would say a fatal fetal diagnosis, or they would speak in very terminal, death, a death sentence, speaking that death sentence over the child without really knowing what the outcome is going to be. So we use life limiting. I think adverse diagnosis is not incorrect either, but those are a little more life affirming use of language than some of the other terms that we've heard.
There's been a lot of research coming out. In fact, with shocking numbers, finding that a lot of these diagnoses are flatly wrong. And in fact, I've spoken with many pro-life OBGYNs who've accompanied families like yours that have brought their child into the world and loved that child, who have seen shocking errors. And
Correct.
it kind of raises the question, and I'm curious your thoughts on all of this as somebody who's been through this. I mean, what do we do with the world of prenatal diagnosis? I mean, I imagine benefits the family to know so that they can plan and prepare, but how do we how do we shift that world such that it's not something that's leading people to you know abort children that are healthy, but that's not a
Yes.
reason to,
Yeah,
how
I
do
hear
we,
what you're saying.
I can't even formulate the
Yeah, I
question,
know.
but it's a very
Absolutely.
complicated
It
issue.
is, yes, I certainly have opinions. It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? I felt that knowledge was power. I was thankful to know, even as hard as it was, and I grieved, but I felt like I was able to process those emotions better and in my own timeline while I was pregnant rather than having an infant to care for. And so for me, that knowledge was power. It helped me learn to research, learn to advocate for her, especially after I heard a doctor referring to her as retarded and saying that she would be a drain on our family. Mama Bear came out because Mama Bear wants to protect the baby. And I loved Verity and I didn't care what her condition was going to be. I was scared, sure. I didn't know how I would care for her. But for me, the knowledge drove me to research and prepared me to be a better advocate for my daughter. However, I also learned in my research that sometimes having a prenatal diagnosis is not helpful in the sense of getting the proper care for your child because it predisposes the doctors to not give certain kinds of care or interventions that they would do for any other child. So, in the research, I was just shocked to learn that the outcomes for these babies with a prenatal diagnosis compared to postnatal was huge because the doctors, if they didn't have a preconditioned, uh, reaction to the baby, they would just simply respond to the baby's needs. What a concept, right? If the baby needs respiratory support, well, let's do what we can to help that child, feeding support, feeding tube. Whereas those children who had a prenatal diagnosis maybe were not offered those things and parents didn't know. They didn't know to ask. They just didn't have that support and the resource. So, there's that aspect of the whole prenatal screening thing that maybe we're setting ourselves up for failure. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense. And as you said, Ashley, the 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 track record for some of this testing, the non-invasive prenatal testing, NIPT, is not diagnostically confirmed. It is something that, especially for the more rare conditions, can be incorrect over 80% of the time. The New York Times even reported that. That is a huge failure rate. Huge. And so, again, we're setting up the scenario that there's something wrong, quote unquote, wrong with your child. And in 80% of the time, that's not correct. I've heard so many stories, so many families. We have mama bears who come into our prenatal support group with just the idea that they might have a child with a condition. And we care for them because the emotional journey of not knowing, many of them choose not to have an amniocentesis. And so they don't get a confirmed diagnosis. And then they come back after birth. They almost feel guilty because so many of our moms are walking this journey, but they say, my child is healthy. They're doing tests now and there's nothing quote unquote wrong. So it's that, yes, knowledge is power, but sometimes it's incorrect. But even if it is correct, as you alluded to, those are still precious lives and they're still unique and valuable. And we want to protect them and give them the care that they need and that they deserve.
Something you said, Beverly, reminds me of personal experience. I had my youngest was diagnosed at the 20-week scan with hydronephrosis and then bilateral pleural effusions. And when they came in to tell us this, of course, I started just burst into tears.
Sure.
I heard the
Yeah.
first 3 words and then nothing after that.
Scary.
And then, when the doctor asked if they could follow up with an amniocentesis, I was like, I am not aborting this baby under any circumstances. I don't want to hear that word. I mean, I just went crazy. This poor
Yeah.
woman, I went kind
Mama
of
Bear
nuts
came
on her.
out.
And I said to my husband, I
Yep.
think the words crazy woman are at the top of my chart now. But she said she was a Muslim doctor. And she said to me, listen, I wouldn't suggest that to you. And, but the more I know about this baby before on the other side of this, of your
Mhm.
abdomen, the better I can treat her. And
Sure.
so, when it's phrased, but if you had said that up front, like we're not suggesting termination, the
Right.
Catholic hospital, we
Yeah.
don't do that here. And Ashley and I had both had the experience of hearing Dr. Elvira Paravicini, who's a neonatologist at Columbia University's hospital, and she sort of pioneered perinatal hospice. And I remember her talking about some of the many patients, little patients she's treated. And she
Mhm.
said, I always like to say, let's just see what the baby tells us when the baby
Mhm.
is born. The baby will
Yep.
tell us what he or she needs.
Yep.
And she spoke about a couple of situations she had where the baby was perfectly healthy, but also other situations where the baby went back to the Lord much more
Mhm.
quickly than they had anticipated. So, but she said, you can't really treat someone until you actually are seeing them and
Right.
holding them. So I like that kind of very personal,
Yes.
connection to them.
It makes sense. Why wouldn't we say that a lot too to our mamas because they um the doctors don't know. They can give their best guesses and sure, I went through all kinds of scans, but we didn't know until Verity was actually born. She did have holes in her heart. Now I'm
Mhm.
glad I didn't know because that would have given me something more to worry
Right.
about. And as it turned out, Verity did not need heart surgery, but just to say, we didn't have the full picture until she was born. And we asked exactly for that in our birth plan. We communicated it to everyone. When she's born, we want you to stabilize her and see what she needs and go from there. And we asked for them to treat her like any of our other babies. Whatever she needs, we're going to give that. And but you're right. If she had led the conversation with that for you, it would have been a lot more peaceful, a lot more calming, rather than raising your blood pressure and kind of putting you on the defense.
Really, I was my oldest daughter was about 10 when my last child was born. And when the nurse called me with the results from the now 10-week blood draw, when they can give you a lot of genetic information, including the sex, she kind of rattled through a few things. And then she said, no this, no that, no Down syndrome. And we ended the call. And I was shocked when my daughter said, what's Down syndrome? And I think about a family like yours, and I'm curious to know because I think it's so impoverishing for children and people in general to not be around or exposed to people with disabilities. And
Yeah.
do you feel your family is the better for her? I'm sure I know the
Oh,
answer, but
yeah.
tell us how and how do we convince society that we're better for their presence in the world as well?
Oh, yes. I feel like this is the conversation. I just want the world to know how amazing life is with Verity. And I often say, when I was pregnant and people would say, oh, my child with, insert condition here has made our lives so much better and richer and we're happier. And I would hear that and like my brain would process that. And I would kind of think, okay, sure, on some level, I believe that. But I think deep down, I was frankly overwhelmed with 8 healthy kids. I didn't know how in the world I was going to care for a child with special needs. And I never want to hide the fact that I had those fears and I struggled as a mama of many. And knowing I am passionately pro-life and I believe Verity is not a mistake. I believe she's a gift, but I just don't see how this is going to play out, God. I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this. And now that we are on the other side of 8 years plus, we just celebrated her 8th birthday. I can say 100% those families are not lying. They are so, these precious individuals have contributed so much. And I know that society would look at a child like mine, or an adult who, needs 100% care, and they would say, oh, person is a burden on society. What can this person possibly do for us? Well, that is completely focusing on the physical material realm. These people give us so much. And Verity has a nurse who goes to school with her, and we talk all the time about how, sometimes it feels like Verity goes more for the other kids' benefit rather than her benefit. Her classmates love her. Many of them have been with her since pre-K days, and she's in second grade, and she doesn't go every day. And sure, she has her special activities and therapies and all kinds of things, but her classmates love her. And I am sure that even those kiddos who aren't in the house with her, like my children and Verity's siblings are on a day-to-day basis, I believe their lives are being changed because they're watching Verity grow and develop at her own rate. They're cheering for her. They are excited when she comes to school and to be with her. But closer to home, my own family absolutely has been changed for the better. Especially the siblings that are close in age to her. They just don't remember life before Verity. And she's always been part of the family dynamics. We have some older ones who have grown up and moved out of the house, but even our very oldest ones who were only in the house for a few years with her, their lives have been profoundly changed as well. And being her mom, I'm in awe. She teaches me so much every day because she has the hardest life of any of us, and yet she is joyful. She loves us. She bursts into smiles and giggles when she is around us, and she truly does make our lives better.
Well, we thank you so much, Beverly, for your veritable pro-life witness and for sharing your time with us today to tell you about your amazing organization and your beautiful daughter. So, where can our listeners go to find out more about your work?
Yeah, we would love to connect with you. We're on social media, mamabearcare.org, MAMA care.org is where you can learn more about our ministry, what we do to help the mamas that are in our group, our prenatal, our prenatal support group is on Facebook. There should be links to that on our website, but you can always reach out via the contact button, or connect with me personally at beverlyjacobson.com as well.
Well, thank you so much, Beverly.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your host, Ashley McGuire, and delighted to have back with us Msgr Roger Landry, who our listeners know well from his many homilies that he's shared with us over the years, and now joining us weekly to discuss whatever it is that's on the hearts and minds of Catholics around the world. And this week, it's the Solemnity of Saint Joseph, and this is one of my personal favorites. We have a very strong devotion to Joseph in our home, and I love him so much. So, Monsignor, tell us about this wonderful saint and what he means to Catholics.
Saint Joseph was part of God's plans for the beginning, and it's easy for us as Catholics to think about Our Lady's role in salvation history. But in the same way that Our Lady was chosen before the foundation of the world, so was St. Joseph. For those who come to Mass on the Solemnity of St. Joseph, March 19th every year, in the first reading, there's a passage from Second Book of Samuel talking about God's plans for his son, eventually, 28th generation grandson of David. But that was only going to happen through the 27th generation grandson of David, who was Jesus's father according to the law, who was Saint Joseph. And so clearly part of salvation history. That's the first thing. Just God the Father loved Joseph so much that he entrusted the raising of his only begotten son according to his son's humanity to this man. Second thing that's always fascinated me about Saint Joseph and God the Father's trust in him and the way we should trust in him is Jesus' life was at risk from Herod and his henchmen. And rather than speaking to Joseph live in daylight, rather than giving him a couple days head start in order to start scampering to Egypt in order to save his son's life, God the Father knew St. Joseph so well that he could alert him in a dream right before Herod's henchmen were essentially at the door, because he could trust so much in St. Joseph's prompt response to whatever the Lord was asking. Rather than deconstructing dreams, he picked up his entire life and moved with Mary, not just once, but 4 different times he did that because of his attentiveness to what God was asking. And so we all have to have a great love for St. Joseph. I've been very moved by something Pope Benedict said about 15 years ago, which, playing on words, that St. Joseph was a just man. He said, we all need to learn from St. Joseph how to adjust everything we do to what God is asking. And St. Joseph is the great teacher of how to adjust, how to make right with God every part of our life. And so he's a great master in the school of divine service, and how lucky we are. The last thing I'll say about St. Joseph is what St. Teresa of Avila said. She was the one who, after Our Lady, is probably the woman who said the greatest love for St. Joseph of all time, perhaps until we got to Ashley McGuire. But nevertheless, St. Teresa of Avila said she had never gone to St. Joseph with any intention that St. Joseph didn't follow through on. And so she dared the people of her age to test her, to give something big to St. Joseph and see if he ever lets them down. She had a great confidence that as long as the intention was in alignment with God's will, St. Joseph would come through. And so many of the other saints over the course of the century have entrusted big intentions to St. Joseph. I do it all the time myself. And what an awesome opportunity it is to be able to celebrate the foster father of the family of God, because God the Father didn't just want Joseph to help raise his son Jesus according to his humanity, but to raise Ashley and Father Roger and everybody else. And so we turn to him during this week in which we celebrate him. We want to give him more than just a day. We want to really live our life under his strong paternal protection. But St. Joseph is there for us, just like he was there for Mary, just like he was there for Jesus.
Well, I'm so blessed to be leaving shortly after our discussion to head down to my daughter's school, where the school will do a pilgrimage, doing a rosary along the way, carrying a statue through an urban area of St. Joseph and walking spiritually with him. And so I'll be pondering your words in my heart when I do that. So, Monsignor, thank you so much for your beautiful reflections on this most beloved of our saints.
Great once again to be with you. St. Joseph, pray for us.
Pray for us. Amen. Thank you, Monsignor.
God bless you, Ashley.
Thank you for joining us today, and we'll look for you next week with an exciting show in store. Matthew Haas is going to be joining us to talk about a wonderful new initiative he has to thank our priests, something that I think is so necessary with the vocations crisis. He'll tell us a little bit about the numbers, which are concerning, and we need to thank our priests. Our priests are such a vital part of our Catholic culture and our Catholic life, and Matthew is really spearheading an exceptional initiative to do that. We're also thrilled to have the entire TCA team headed together next week to record from the University of Notre Dame, Our Lady's campus, with a great conference on women in the church. We'll be talking about the feminine genius, feminism, what it means to be a Catholic woman today. It's such an important topic, and we'll be interacting with really some of the best theologians and experts that the church has to offer on this front, this very important topic, something that Pope Francis himself said is an important priority for the church right now, and we'll check in to see where we are with that. We'll also have a voice we haven't heard from in a while. Our former TCA colleague and co-host Maureen Ferguson will be with us, sharing details of the new USERF report out next week. Make sure to tune in and join us. And we'd like to thank all of our guests and listeners for joining us today. Make sure to follow us on social media, and as always, you go with our prayers.